The fortress of Ashvale stood on a cliff above the sea, its stone walls older than memory. Inside its cold halls lived wolves who could walk as men, ruled by an alpha king feared across every pack in the land. Among the guards, the warriors, and the nobles who filled that fortress, there was one girl nobody noticed at all. Her name was Illyra Voss, and she was a maid. Illyra had come to Ashvale when she was 12 years old, carried in by a hunting party that found her alone in the snow, half frozen, with no memory of her family, and no name but the one stitched into her torn coat. The Alpha King at the time, Kale's father, had allowed her to stay only because a servant girl was more useful than a dead child on his land. She grew up scrubbing floors, hauling firewood, and carrying trays through halls where no one looked at her twice. She learned quickly that survival meant being invisible. Now, at 20, Illyra moved through the fortress like a shadow. She rose before dawn and worked until her hands ached. She kept her eyes down when nobles passed, and she never spoke unless spoken to. The new Alpha King, Kale Draven, had taken the throne 2 years earlier after his father's death, and in all that time, he had never once looked at her. To him, she was simply part of the furniture of his home, as unremarkable as a chair or a candle. Kale was not a cruel king, but he was a distant one. He carried the weight of his father's legacy on broad shoulders, and grief had hardened something in him that had never quite softened again. He ruled with discipline and fairness, but warmth was a language he had forgotten how to speak. The pack respected him. Nobody claimed to know him. On the night everything changed, Illyra was carrying a basin of water down a servant's corridor when a guard named Bren stepped into her path. He had been drinking, and his eyes held a look she had learned to fear. She backed away, but the corridor was narrow, and he was between her and the door. In her panic, she turned and ran the only way she could, deeper into the fortress, past halls she had never been allowed to enter, until she found herself standing before a heavy door carved with old symbols she did not recognize. It was unlocked. She did not know why. She slipped inside and pressed her back against it, listening for footsteps that never came. When her heartbeat finally slowed, she looked around and realized where she was. This was the royal vault, the sacred chamber where the treasures of House Draven were kept, forbidden to anyone but the king and his most trusted elders. In the center of the room, resting on a pedestal of black stone, sat a pale gem that seemed to hold moonlight inside it, even though no moon shone through the narrow window above. Illyra had heard whispers about the Moonstone her whole life, though she had never truly believed the stories. It was said to be the oldest relic of the Wolf Kingdoms, a stone that could recognize true royal blood and had gone dark 300 years ago, after some forgotten tragedy no one spoke of anymore. She should have turned and left, she knew that. But something pulled her forward, some quiet ache she could not name, and before she understood what she was doing, her fingers brushed against the surface of the stone. Light exploded through the chamber, silver and blinding, and a sound like a heartbeat rolled through the walls of the entire fortress. Illyra fell to her knees, gasping, as warmth flooded through her veins like fire and ice at once. Somewhere far below, every wolf in Ashvale felt it, a pulse of ancient power, awake after 3 centuries of silence, calling out to something it had finally found. Kale felt it first, as a jolt in his chest, sharp enough to steal his breath. He was in the Great Hall discussing border patrols with his commanders when the light surged through the fortress and the old stones themselves seemed to hum. He was on his feet and moving before anyone could ask what was happening, some instinct older than thought, driving him straight toward the vault. He found her there, kneeling on the floor, her eyes glowing a soft, impossible blue, her hand still resting on the Moonstone, as though she could not let go. For a moment, Kale simply stared, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes were showing him. The maid who brought him his meals and swept his floors was kneeling in the royal vault, bonded to a relic that had not responded to a living soul in 300 years. "What have you done?" he said, though it was not truly a question. Illyra could not answer. She was shaking, overwhelmed by sensations she had no words for, strength humming beneath her skin, awareness of every wolf's heartbeat in the fortress, and beneath it all, a strange and terrible grief that was not her own. When the light finally faded and she could speak again, all she could say was, I don't know what happened to me." Kale summoned the pack elders that same night. Among them was Seraphine, the oldest wolf in Ashvale, a woman whose memory stretched back further than anyone else living. When she looked at Alira, her face went pale, and her hands trembled as she reached out, though she did not quite dare to touch her. "It cannot be," Seraphine whispered. "House Lunareth was destroyed, every one of them. There were no survivors." The name meant nothing to Alira, but it clearly meant everything to the elders gathered in the room. Seraphine explained, her voice heavy with old sorrow, that 300 years ago, before House Draven ever held the throne, the true royal bloodline of Ashvale had belonged to House Lunareth, keepers of the Moonstone since the founding of the kingdom. A rival pack, hungry for power, had turned against them in a single bloody night, slaughtering the family and seizing the throne for themselves. The Moonstone had gone dark that same night, as though grieving alongside the kingdom, and had never responded to another soul since. Until now. Alira sat frozen as the pieces began to fall into place around her, the orphaned girl found alone in the snow, with no memory and no family, the sealed silence where her past should have been, the strange dreams she sometimes had of a woman's voice, singing to her in a language she did not know. Seraphine gently suggested what none of them wanted to say aloud, that Alira's mother, in her final moments, must have hidden her only daughter and placed a spell upon her mind, sealing away her memories and her bloodline to keep her alive, praying that one day it would be safe for the truth to return. That truth had waited 20 years to surface, and now it stood in the middle of the royal vault, trembling and afraid, in a servant's worn dress. The days that followed were unlike anything Alira had ever known. She was moved from the servants' quarters to a chamber fit for nobility, though she felt like an impostor within its silk sheets and carved furniture. Word spread quickly through the fortress, and with it came both wonder and danger. Some among the pack looked at her with something like reverence, bowing their heads as she passed, as though royalty had simply been hiding among them all along. Others looked at her with open suspicion, unwilling to accept that a maid could be anything more than what she had always seemed. A few looked at her with something far colder. If Alira truly carried the last royal bloodline of House Lunareth, then by ancient law, hers was the rightful claim to the throne, not Kale's. His family had ruled for 3 centuries as a line born of conquest, not birthright. Some lords whispered that she should be removed quietly before she could gather support. Others whispered that the wisest path forward would be a marriage between her and Kale, binding the true bloodline to the current crown and settling the matter without bloodshed. Kale found himself caught between duty and something he did not fully understand. He had spent 2 years building himself into a king his father would have respected, disciplined, and unshakable, and now, the ground beneath that identity had shifted overnight. He sought Alira out one evening, as she stood alone on a balcony overlooking the sea, still unused to the weight of the fine clothes now draped over her shoulders. "You could have stayed hidden," he said, standing beside her but not too close. "The Moonstone chose you the moment you touched it. You did not seek this out." "I didn't want any of it," Alira admitted quietly. "I wanted to disappear into that vault and pretend I never touched the stone at all. Now, everyone looks at me like I'm either a queen or a threat, and I don't know which one I actually am." "Maybe you don't have to be either," Kale said. "Maybe you can simply be yourself and let the rest catch up." It was a strange kind of comfort coming from a man who had barely spoken a full sentence to her in 8 years, yet something in his voice felt honest, in a way that eased the tightness in her chest, if only a little. Over the following weeks, Kale made a quiet effort to know her, not as a political solution to a succession crisis, but as a person. He asked about the years she had spent scrubbing his floors, and for the first time, he truly listened to her answers. Alira found herself slowly trusting him, though a small voice inside her kept warning that his sudden warmth could simply be ambition dressed up as affection, a convenient way to secure a throne that royal blood now threatened to take from him. She did not have the luxury of resolving that fear slowly, because the danger surrounding her was far from finished. 3 weeks after the Moonstone had awakened, scouts brought grim news to the fortress. A pack from the northern territories, the Dravencoal, had begun moving troops toward Ashvale's borders. Seraphine's face turned grim when she heard the name. For the Draven Cole were descended from the very pack that had slaughtered House Lunareth 3 centuries ago. If Illyra's bloodline still lived, they could not allow the Moonstone's power to fall into hands that might one day challenge their old crime and unite the kingdom's true line of succession against them. Kael prepared his warriors, but he knew that steel alone would not be enough. Illyra, though frightened, understood something the others did not fully grasp yet. The Moonstone had not simply marked her. It had begun to change her, giving her strength beyond her training and a strange, growing ability to sense the presence of other wolves nearby, even command their attention when she called upon it. Seraphine confirmed what Illyra suspected. The powers of House Lunareth were awakening within her, slowly, the way a long dormant ember catches flame. The attack came at night, exactly as the elders feared. Assassins from the Draven Cole slipped through the outer walls under cover of darkness, moving straight toward the royal vault, intent on destroying the Moonstone and ending the bloodline before it could rise again. Illyra felt them coming before the alarm bells even rang, a cold prickling awareness spreading through her chest like ice water. She reached the vault before Kael did, refusing to hide in her chamber, while others fought a battle that was, at its heart, about her own survival. When the assassins broke through the door, Illyra stood before the Moonstone, and for the first time since that fateful night, she reached out and embraced its power fully instead of fearing it. Silver light poured from her hands, not with the wild, uncontrolled force of that first awakening, but with purpose, guided by instinct that felt older than her own life. She called upon the wolves nearby, and they answered, rallying to defend the vault even as steel clashed in the corridors beyond. Kael arrived moments later, fighting his way through the chaos, and when he reached her side, he did not try to shield her behind him. Instead, he fought beside her, matching her step for step, protecting the space around her, while she held the line that mattered most. Together they drove the assassins back, and by the time dawn broke over Ashvale's cliffs, the attack had failed, the conspiracy exposed for all the pack to see. The truth of the Draven Cole's ancient betrayal could no longer be denied or buried, and the elders declared, with Seraphine's blessing, that House Lunareth's rightful heir had proven herself not through birth alone, but through courage. In the days that followed, the pack gathered in the Great Hall to witness something that had not happened in 300 years. Illyra stood before them, no longer a maid, no longer merely a mystery revealed by a glowing stone, but a queen recognized in her own right. Kael knelt before her, not as a king clinging to his throne, but as a man choosing, freely and without fear, to stand beside a partner he had come to genuinely love. Illyra looked out over the hall that had once felt so cold and unreachable to her, remembering every floor she had scrubbed within these walls, every meal she had carried through corridors where no one saw her at all. She thought of the frightened, nameless child found alone in the snow, and the frightened young woman who had once wished only to disappear. She did not disappear. She had become exactly who she was always meant to be, and as she took her place upon the throne of Ashvale, with Kael rising to stand at her side, the fortress that had once overlooked her finally welcomed her home.